What's up everyone and welcome back to my Echoes of Time channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button. Today let's get started. Casanova's crazy real-life story. It is now nearly universal to link the name Casanova with a sensual, promiscuous, and frequently unreliable lover. Giacomo Casanova, the man who coined that phrase, was undoubtedly all of that and more. Casanova was an author, scholar, actor, violinist, spy, occultist, proprietor of a silk business, soldier, gambler, wizard, layabout, libertine, and more from 1725 until his death in 1798. Catherine the Great, Mozart, Benjamin Franklin, Voltaire, Goethe, and several popes were among the notable people he met and became friends with. In addition, he was a fugitive, rapist, con artist, swindler, and outrageous, vengeful prankster. What we're trying to say is that he contained multitudes. Here is a taste of the strange and unbelievable life of one of the most well-known and notorious Lotharios in history. Even if it would take several volumes to cover the entirety of Casanova's crazy existence literally, it's called Histoire de mi vie, and it's extremely long. Casanova had nosebleeds, but a witch fixed them. The child of actors Gaetano Casanova and Zanetta Ferrucci, Giacomo Casanova was born in Venice in 1725. However, Casanova would come to doubt that Gaetano was his biological father, thinking instead that he might have been the illegitimate son of Michel Grimani, who owned the theater where his parents were employed, according to All That's Interesting. It was more consistent with Casanova's self-perception as a man of low morals and high society to be the son of an unlawful marriage between a courtesan and a nobleman. In any event, Giacomo's mother abandoned him to pursue a career as a touring actress around Europe after Gaetano passed away when he was a little boy. Consequently, Casanova's grandma, Marzia, nurtured him mainly. Casanova was a slow, sickly child who frequently had nosebleeds. His grandmother chose to use witchcraft, a traditional therapy for nosebleeds, when he was 8 years old. In his memoir, Casanova describes how they were brought to the island of Murano and discovered an elderly woman sitting on a cot with black cats all about her. The witch informed Casanova that a lovely stranger would pay him a visit. He saw a woman kissing him as she came down his chimney that night. Later, he acquired a penchant for odd ladies, his nosebleeds ceased, and he was suddenly able to read. Casanova began dating girls at a young age. Casanova's image as a prolific lover is more closely linked to him than anything else, therefore it's perhaps not surprising that he began dating young. According to Casanova's memoirs, he was taken from his home in Venice to Padua, where he resided in a dilapidated boarding house, on his 9th birthday. Perhaps Padua's drier air was considered healthier for him, but he feared his family was getting rid of him. A young priest named Dr. Gozzi tutored Casanova while he was at Padua, teaching him scholastic topics and how to play the violin. However, Bettina, Dr. Gozzi's younger sister, also gave the young Casanova a different kind of schooling. The young man was attracted to her when Casanova was 11 and Bettina was 14. He claimed that she kindled in his heart the first spark of a passion which, afterwards became in me the ruling one. The boy's first sexual experiences, though clearly not his last, were Bettina's kisses and what Casanova considered to be innocent caresses at the time. He would simultaneously lose his virginity to sisters Nanette and Martin Savorgnan while he was a teenager. Casanova excelled at more than just love. Casanova was something of a prodigy when it came to topics other than physical love. He was well known for his sharp wit and insatiable curiosity even as a young child. As mentioned in All That's Interesting, Casanova enrolled in the University of Padua in 1737 at the astounding age of 12, and by the age of 17, he earned a law degree. Even though he was successful in the field early on, Casanova wasn't particularly passionate about the law. According to him, he had an invincible repugnance for practicing law, which was what his guardian and tutor, Dr. Gozzi, had hoped he would do. Specifically, Gozzi had hoped Casanova would become an ecclesiastical lawyer since he thought it was how he would acquire his riches. Rather, Casanova encouraged a passion for medicine, which he believed was his calling. He claimed he would have been a doctor if he had his way, a profession in which quackery is of still greater avail than in the legal business. Ultimately, Casanova never practiced law or medicine. At the university, he also studied chemistry, arithmetic, and moral philosophy, but the primary subject that would become one of his major interests was gambling. During his undergraduate years, Casanova's gambling debts grew to such an extent that his grandmother had to come and take him back to Venice. How Casanova's first client came and went. The fact is that after returning to Venice, Casanova was given minor orders by the Patriarch of Venice, which means that he was admitted as a low-level clergyman and started working as a clerical lawyer as his mentor had hoped. However, at this point, it might be difficult to consider the lustful and gambling young man as a tool of the Christian Church. But his memoirs claim that the rock and roll lifestyle the young gentleman was pursuing was not supported by his job as an abbé. Casanova therefore made an effort to gain the favor of a wealthy senator in the hopes that he would become a patron. In actuality, Casanova used this tactic for a large portion of his life. In this instance, the patron was Alvise Malipiero, a 76-year-old senator with a stately home who was surrounded every evening by a well-chosen party of ladies who had all known how to make the best of their younger days. Casanova was able to establish himself as Malipiero's constant companion, and the elder man taught him about wine, fine dining, and society. But this was not to be a lasting partnership. Therese Immer, Malipiero's 17-year-old neighbor, whom he had long had intentions toward, paid the two men a visit one day. Casanova and Immer became agitated when Malipiero left the room, and Malipiero caught them and used a stick to evict Casanova from his house. Unexpectedly, Casanova's visit with the Pope went well. It should come as no surprise to many that Casanova's tenure in the church was brief. Following the passing of his grandmother, who was the strongest supporter of Casanova's decision to pursue a career in clerical work, the young man enrolled in a seminary with the goal of becoming a priest. However, his gambling debts quickly put him in jail, but it wasn't the last time. Casanova resigned after he determined the job wasn't for him, despite his mother's best efforts to obtain him a job with a bishop. According to his memoirs, he ultimately became a scribe for Cardinal Acquaviva, who held a position of influence. It was because of this job that the pornographic young Venetian met Pope Benedict XIV in an unusual encounter. Benedict XIV was fortunately not offended by Casanova's impertinent questions, such as his request for a dispensation to eat meat on Fridays because fish irritated his eyes and for blanket permission to read any and all forbidden books. The Pope even granted Casanova's request, but inadvertently forgot to provide him with written permission. Following his involvement in a scandal, Casanova was expelled by Cardinal Acquaviva, ending his religious career. However, somewhat astonishingly, a later pope would grant Casanova the Order of the Golden Spur, a papal knighthood for people who had performed outstanding service to the church. A wizard named Giacomo. After his brief tenure with the church came to an end, Casanova was looking for a new job. He ultimately bought himself a commission as a military officer, but after losing the majority of his gaming money, he gave up his commission because the military did not retain his interest. He made a fleeting attempt to follow his passion and pursue a career in gambling, but he lost everything he had and turned to his childhood musical training, playing violin for a Venetian theater. However, Casanova describes how his fortunes drastically changed in his memoirs. When Casanova was 21 years old, she happened to see a senator who had dropped a letter while boarding a gondola after leaving the orchestra early one day. The senator invited the nobleman to accompany him after Casanova handed him his dropped letter. Don Matteo Bragadin, the senator, had a stroke while in the boat. Casanova saved the senator's life by applying his medical expertise, most notably by removing the mercury ointment that another doctor had applied. Bragadin grew to believe that a young man with such a wealth of information must possess superhuman abilities. Bragadin essentially adopted Casanova, giving him the money the young man needed for his libertine lifestyle since the senator and his associates were occultists. Finally, Casanova was the aristocrat he had always imagined himself to be. A growing string of pranks results in Casanova's banishment. Funded by Matteo Bragadin, for whom Casanova ostensibly served as a legal assistant, Casanova led the life of a libertine lord for the next few years. As he puts it, this gave the young man the opportunity to lead a life of complete freedom, caring for nothing but what ministered to his tastes. Of course, Casanova's tastes were highly influenced by gambling and sensual adventures. Although Casanova's patron largely ignored his troubled lifestyle, he did warn him that he saw his own youthful foolishness in his protégé and warned Casanova to be mindful of the potential repercussions. Sometimes Casanova would turn Bragadin's terrible forebodings into jest and continue his course of extravagance. Naturally, Bragadin would prove to be correct. According to Casanova's memoirs, he did the only sensible thing when a merchant, with whom Casanova had a romantic relationship, humiliated him by cutting a bridge plank in two, causing him to fall into the mud. He then intensified the prank war. Using the arm of a corpse he had personally excavated from a new burial, He attempted to persuade the merchant that his bedroom was haunted. The dead arm terrified the merchant so much that he became paralyzed and never came back. Whoops. Casanova was forced to leave Venice after being accused of sexual assault, for which he was later found not guilty, grave desecration, and nearly killing a man. A spy took Casanova's magic books. The Frenchwoman, who was a fugitive herself, enchanted Casanova with her wit, intelligence, charm, and beauty. He called her Henriette. Casanova met the love of his life during his self-imposed exile from Venice. But she left him a farewell letter stating incorrectly that he would forget her, which broke his heart. Disappointed by this defeat, Casanova went back to Venice, went on a gambling binge, and used the money to sleep his way across Europe, including having a four-way with a French ambassador and 2 nuns. While in France, Casanova became a member of the Freemasons, a fraternity that was generally appealing to society's intelligent men, but that particularly appealed to Casanova because of its secrecy. During his time with Don Bragadin, he had already become heavily involved in Kabbalism. He also had a strong interest in the Rosicrucians, another covert spiritualist organization. Casanova was able to rise to the position of Master Mason. But there was a cost to all this forbidden knowledge. According to his memoirs, Casanova's secret library of magic books was stolen, and a spy named Count Minucci was employed by the State Inquisition of Venice to verify Casanova's prohibited knowledge of the occult. Casanova demonstrated his magical expertise by teaching Minucci how to call forth elemental spirits, assuming that Minucci was a diamond dealer. As it happens, this is not the best course of action when dealing with an Inquisition agent. Casanova's spectacular escape. Giacomo Casanova was captured by the Venetian Inquisition in 1755, and the young libertine's extravagant way of life ultimately caught up with him. The Inquisition accused Casanova of blasphemy, Kabbalism, gambling, astrology, and Freemasonry, all of which were deemed to be egregious insults to Catholic orthodoxy and public decency, as explained by All That's Interesting. Casanova was brought to the notorious prison known as I Piombai, or the Leads, which consisted of 7 lead-roofed cells on the top floor of the Doge's palace, not the Meme Shiba Inu, but the highest authority in Venice. This torturously uncomfortable, flea-ridden cell was no place for a man of luxury such as Casanova, so he immediately began planning his escape. Casanova managed to acquire an iron bar, which he used to begin scraping a hole under his bed, which he knew would lead to the Inquisitor's chambers below. His plan was to break through on a holiday, when he knew the Inquisitors would be gone. Unfortunately, 3 days before his planned escape, Casanova was relocated to another chamber in the prison. Nevertheless, he kept trying, and with the help of a rogue priest, the 2 men succeeded to tunnel out through the ceiling of the prison on Halloween 1756. Casanova left a note: "Since you all did not ask my permission to throw me in jail, I am not asking for yours to get out." Casanova's wizard rivalry with the Count de Saint-Germain. After escaping prison, Casanova fled back to Paris, where he linked up with old pals. One advised him that a smart way to get into the good graces of the Parisian officials would be to find a way to raise a lot of money for the state. To this purpose, Casanova helped organize France's first state lottery, and it won't surprise you that the silver-tongued devil was aces at selling tickets for it. He gained a sizable income as a result, which he utilized to gain access to French high society. Once there, he defrauded affluent French people of their fortunes by using his reputation as an alchemist, magician, and occultist. Notably, he was able to persuade the upper class that he possessed a wizard's aptitude for numerology due to his exceptional recall and aptitude for numbers. Casanova gained popularity among prominent individuals like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Madame de Pompadour. In this fashion, of course, he also created some prominent competitors. Casanova recalls in his memoirs that he found himself at loggerheads with another mystic in the person of the enigmatic Count de Saint-Germain shown above, a man whose reputation was, and still is, even more fantastical than Casanova's. Casanova characterizes Saint-Germain as the king of impostors and quacks, who convinced his victims that he was over 300 years old, that he could melt diamonds, and that he knew the secret of constructing the universal medicine. Casanova's lengthy scam. Don't get me wrong, Casanova was somewhat scummy despite the romanticism that has developed around him as a wit, a lover, and an adventurer due in large part to the success of his works, in which he creates his own reputation. Of the 120 sexual partners he claimed to have had in his life, many were children, slaves, unwelcome lovers, and, in at least one instance, his own daughter, according to All That's Interesting. In addition, he was a thief and con artist who would stop at nothing to obtain the funds required to support his extravagant preferences. Even if he asserted that deceiving a fool is an exploit worthy of an intelligent man, his dishonesty and stealing nevertheless caused harm to others. The Marquise d'Urf was among the most notable victims of his con artistry and quack occultism. According to Do Travel magazine, the 63-year-old Marquise hosted salons to discuss her fascination with alchemy and the occult, which was popular at the time. Of course, Casanova was a valued guest at these salons because of his enormous magical renown. In order to restore her youth and the greater magical power of a male wizard, he informed the Marquise that she could conceive a male child into whom her own soul could be transferred. In what way would Casanova do this? Of course, by having sex with her. Casanova had some Mozart notes. His deception was discovered when the sexagenarian Marquise d'Urf failed to conceive as Casanova had promised, and King Louis XV himself exiled Casanova from France. Casanova's crazy life is too extensive to describe here. He was a spy for a while, ran a silk factory for a while, failed to convince Catherine the Great to adopt a national lottery, nearly lost his hand in a duel, met Benjamin Franklin and discussed hot air balloons, contemplated becoming a monk until a pretty girl passed by, and so on. But in his last years, he ended himself in Prague, where he served as the Castle Dux's librarian. He also attempted to instruct Mozart on how to do his duties there. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, Casanova had become interested in opera, which was popular in Prague at the time. While in Prague, Casanova ran up Lorenzo da Ponte, an old friend from Venice who was now working as the librettist for Mozart. It is thought that Mozart and Casanova first met when Mozart visited Prague. Casanova sent Mozart some suggestions, which may or may not have been included in the piece, after learning that Mozart was writing Don Giovanni, a story about a compulsive sex guy who was similar to Casanova.